Tom, first of all, tell us about Levo Mind. Tell us about where you come up with the name and just a little bit of history behind Levo.
Okay. Well, first, thank you. As soon as I walked in and saw the monster, I'm like, these are my guys. These are my guys. Levo is Latin for a description of lifting, upholding, and trying to make lighter. So Levo is a mind care company. It's a mental health company. Something that we started a few years ago. I can share a lot about the background and the history, of what's there, but the crux of it is that it's a mental health medication management company. So we employ men and women who are educated and who are credentialed to write prescriptions for medication, but they do it with the knowledge and expertise in mental health specifically. So these are men and women who have gone to school or have been working to sit with people at their lowest points of life, typically, or they're in a situation where finally they are saying, I gotta get help, I gotta figure this out. And so just by nature of the background of what we are doing, what our business is, and the people that we're trying to serve, these providers who are credentialed and have the education and background to write prescriptions, they're the biggest hearts on the planet. And so actually originally when we started the company, it was called Aspire Medical, which was a sister company to a therapy company. And as ownership changed and as we decided that we really wanted to grow and expand a different footprint, we ended up rebranding to Levo. And in that process, there was a lot of discussion and what do we name it and how do we come up with a name? And to be frank, it's very challenging to rebrand a company when an attorney gets involved.
Yeah.
And we, love attorneys, but we really wanted to do it right. And because of my prior business experience as an entrepreneur building a company, I just wanted to protect what we were going to build and do. And so we chose a name. It had to be unique because trying to get it, through the U.S. Patent Office.
So difficult. So difficult to find a name that sticks, that you can, trademark. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why there's so many funky names out there where you think, what were they sober when they came?
What were they thinking?
Yeah, what were they thinking? But so anyway, we went through a lot of iterations, and in the end, I was sitting one night actually with Kevin Day, who's a joint friend of ours.
Sure.
And Kevin and I were at his coffee shop, and we just kept searching names, and because of my prior ski bum experience, I'm just always attracted to, names like Bolé and Raven and right?
Yeah.
All of these 80 ski companies that I just grew up loving. And I don't know what it was, but I ran this search for Latin terms that represent serving and loving and lifting people. And Levo came up. And so it really was that name that we kind of caught on to. And as soon as we knew the definition of it, it was like, wow, this is the one.
It stuck quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, trying to convince business partners was, an entirely different challenge. But what's interesting about business in my background is that you're in the right place when things start to fall together. And it's never easy. At that point, we had spent a couple weeks, iterations with attorneys. We were kind of at our wits' end. Even Kevin and I that night in the coffee shop were kind of like, man, I don't got it. We're tired. But it's been my experience as an entrepreneur, at least thus far, that you have to put the time in. You have to get gritty. And when you do it, typically, grit ends up showing you these magical moments. And there was just a moment there of like, that's it. That's really it. So yeah, that's Levo.
It's funny as you mentioned that, I'm envisioning through careful thought, days, you almost eliminate things, and then you kind of end up with this beautiful thing that's on a pedestal, and it's almost undeniable when you get to that point of this is it.
Yeah.
But it takes that marinating on it, thinking about it, working through it.
Yeah, chipping away, right? And, to Kevin's credit, he was integral to that part, And what's interesting about the story of this company is that there are 3 women owners. I am one of the owners, but there are 3 other women. Beth Waldron, who's the CEO, Stacy Davies, who runs a lot of the operational stuff, and then Andrea Beckstrom, who's the medical director. And so Kevin wasn't involved in the beginning, but as time went on and these incredible women were building the company and we were going through all of these growth pains, there was just a point where it was like, something's missing here. We need to find the right person to help drive branding and messaging and what we're trying to do. And when we knew that we were going to rebrand, again, these magic moments of like, how's the timing fit? And it probably didn't make the right sense to hire a marketing director then, but I've always felt like when you find the right people in business, you gotta nab them.
You gotta lock them up.
You gotta lock them up, And I guess this is just part of me. Maybe it's the visionary in me, but when you see where the business is going and people come into the picture and you know that they're part of where the business is going and where it should be, it is important to lock them up. So at the time we brought Kevin on, we hired him, and the day one I said, Kevin, I want you to rebrand the company. He was like, what?
It's a lot on his shoulders.
Yeah, I'm like, this is the first responsibility. But you guys know Kevin, right?
Very well.
You know he's an artist. And he's not just an artist, but Kevin knows how to capture emotion.
Yes.
So if this is a mental health company, I don't know that there's a better human to have the capabilities that Kevin has and to be able to land the ship like he did. And if you go to our website, labelmind.com, and you look at it, he nailed it.
Yeah.
It's soft.
The colors,
It's
everything about it.
It's approachable. So yeah, that was a magic moment when it lined up for
K-Day. Kudos to K-Day.
100%.
So
Guy's great.
with your history, just from talking offline and knowing a little bit about your journey, you have a lot of entrepreneurial history, different companies that you've evolved and sold. And now you find yourself in mental health and awareness. And correct me if I'm wrong, but your wife is a clinician, a therapist. How is this piece, and I know you were with Aspire prior to, but how is this piece different from maybe the previous 2 decades of building business?
So different.
Yeah?
So different.
How?
Yeah. Well, first of all, my wife's name's Liza Telford. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist. I can say this, take it for what it's worth. But the best things that have happened in my life are because of this woman. It's entirely true. My prior life in finance and even getting into mental health is because of who I married. So I fully believe that, when you marry the right person and it's just right, they're the right one for you, and you feel that. It's been that way for me. And so Liza has, been incredible for my life, literally. Not just that we're married, but when I look back, when I die, I hope my kids and grandkids and great-grandkids, they read in my journals, wow, great-grandpa's career was directly correlated to the doors mom opened, great-grandma. So, and what I mean by that is, we knew each other in high school, but I started an LDS mission, came home from that mission. This woman, Liza, had Dear John'd me, so she's like,
oh, Liza.
Sayonara. But after post LDS mission, things circled back. We started dating. We got married young, and her father had worked in the financial services industry for years. And right after I came home from a mission, my next door neighbor had been in financial services. His name is Brent Hill. And Brent is an amazing man. What I would consider one of my first business mentors. And right after my mission, literally a couple days after, he's like, hey, I want to take you to lunch. I'm like, yes, anything. Like, what do you got?
Yeah.
And he said, I want to hire you to work in my financial planning firm. And I was like, I can't even spell that. Like, what do you do?
Yeah, what's that?
Yeah. So, I mean, my, pre-mission life was, I was a horrible student. I was a ski bum. I committed to everyone who knew me, I'll never wear a tie. I was juicy fruit. I'm gonna ski. That's what I'm gonna do.
You want to be a bum?
Yeah, I just wanted to ski. I grew up ski racing, and so that's kind of what I had. Well, when I came home, it was an entirely different vision for life for me, and I realized, hey, if I'm going to attract and find someone who I love, she probably doesn't want to live in a van down by the river with skis on the back.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, he took me to lunch. We chatted. He ended up hiring me. And I quickly started to see a world that I had no idea about. So he was a financial planner. He worked with a lot of successful people. But he himself was the most intriguing to me. How he lived, his habits, how does he think? What's his vision of life? What does he want? How is he going to get it? All of those things. And so I just sat at the feet and watched and learned from just a brilliant business mind. And that was super attractive to me. While I was there, I got serious with Liza, and I was like, hey, I want to marry this girl. We got engaged. And it's just who I am. It's my nature. I'm ultra independent. Ultra. I mean, to an extreme, And so as we started dating, I definitely kept an arm's length of like, what's her family expect of me? What do I want them to know about my life, what I'm doing? Her dad was in financial services. And so I didn't, as much as I wanted to know their family and I wanted to know and get close to them, I really wanted them to know, like, I got this. I can figure it out.
Yeah.
I wanted that kind of strength of character, and I wanted them to believe, just like every other son-in-law, right? Like, I got this. But as time went on and I stayed at that firm and learned financial services, what I started to realize was that if you're going to be in financial services, interfacing with people, right? If you're going to build the relationships, if they're going to be your clients, you need to put yourself in the best possible seat to be able to provide all the solutions that your clients could need. And so as time went on, I just started to watch and pay attention. What were the firms that were out there? What were their capabilities? And what I started to realize, even at a very young age, was that you can do very well if you find yourself in the right spot, position yourself in a good environment, and build those trust, with clients. And so while I was literally a freshman in college, while I was getting engaged, I got all of the financial services licenses that you need to be able to invest people's money, sell it, insurances, and do investment advisory work. And so I had kind of this whole two paths of education going at the same time. And what ended up happening is that a year after I was at that firm, I was fully licensed. So I'm now 22 years old, sitting with people, and I got myself into a couple situations where the client need allowed me to make some pretty significant money. And I was like, wow, this is real. Like, I want to do more of this.
Yeah.
And so it grew, and the desire grew. And then I started to realize that if I really wanted to take this far, I needed to be able to offer a lot of solutions, not just a narrow, capability. Well, because of being in a couple of those situations and competing with other older advisors, some firms learned who I was and that I was young. I was still in college. They ended up reaching out to me. And so I had some recruiters call me, sat down with some firms. And in the process of kind of looking out there and still being engaged, I was like, well, I wonder what my father-in-law does. And so I reached out, we had some conversations, asked for some advice. And, probably 6 months or so after I ended up getting married, the firm that he was at approached me and said, hey, do you know him? We know him. And then it was like game on. They're like, hey, we really want you to be here.
Yeah.
So all that to say, long story short, I ended up in financial services with Northwestern Mutual. And for about 6-7 years, I did personal planning there. into my low 30s. And during that process of doing personal planning, one of the largest producers for that firm was in Newport Beach, California. I met him at an awards banquet. He says, hey, come out here. I don't do any investment work. I know you know it. You've been raised in it. I have thousands of insurance clients. You just go nuts on my book of business. So my wife and I moved out there and spent some time. And one of the things that came out of that, I was there about 16, 17 months, and then we wanted to move back and be in Utah close to family. But one of the things that came out of that was two more mentors, two gentlemen that I met who are killing it. One was from Southern California, one was from Princeton, New Jersey. And I saw them speak one day, and it just struck me that they were doing institutional planning versus retail individual planning. And something just, went off in my mind. And basically what they were doing is they were working with large institutions, banks, credit unions, and they were managing assets at an entirely different level.
Yeah.
Instead of the individual, they were dealing with major dollars.
100x.
Yes.
Because you get a bigger pool.
Yeah, and so it was a larger asset mix and much more complicated. And there was something about learning that very complex environment, more complex sale, a longer just runway. And every one of those organizations who you were working with, they had 15 to 21 decision makers. Imagine going to a board meeting where there's 15 doctors who sit on the board. Smartest people, right? In their minds on the planet.
Convincing them to switch
how do you do that?
their current.
So it was just this moment of like, how are these guys doing this? And so, this is a theme for me, mentors. Who are you surrounding yourself with? How do they think? Elevate your thinking. And so during that time frame of being in Southern California, these gentlemen taught me something. Well, they didn't know who I was. I was a young 20-something-year-old kid. One stayed in Southern California where he lived, another one went back to Princeton. They were just there that day speaking to this large group of advisors with the hope that some of those advisors would get them into opportunities. Well, of all the people, to get them in, it was this 20-something-year-old kid. So I ended up one day literally cold calling a ton of banks, throughout Idaho, Utah, the Intermountain region, and getting lots of appointments. And I did that for a while, and then I called this gentleman in Princeton, New Jersey, and said, hey, I got a bunch of appointments. Can you fly out? He's like, what? Who are you?
Was that a new thing at the time?
No.
People had been doing it, just hadn't seen the success.
Yeah, there were really, I didn't know this at the time, but there were really 3 or 4 huge players in that space throughout the country. Unbeknownst to me, I was just like, hey,
You're just a 28-year-old kid calling on banks.
If you get paid to manage assets, why not manage really large tranches, as they call it, dollars? And so he ended up coming out to Utah. We went on, this road show together, seeing a bunch of these organizations, and ended up having lunch, during that time frame. And it started a relationship, a mentor relationship. And it just grew from there. And a few months later, we knocked down some huge cases. And he said, hey, you need to be a partner in this firm. So I ended up at a young age joining that firm in Princeton, New Jersey, doing this type of work. That grew we went nuts for about 5 years growing that. So that was called Institutional Financial Services. And in 2007...
That was the name of the entity?
Well, it was Bank Financial Services Group, but it was doing institutional financial services. It was working at the institutional level. So it was very different. Instead of sitting across from someone and saying, hey, I'm sorry we lost some money in the stock market, right? And they're very, shook up and emotional. Yeah. I always struggled with that. I was like, letting them down, this emotional environment. In the institutional world, once you have a vote and it's majority, there's no one going back on it.
Yeah.
If 15 people vote and it's in favor, it's like, it's done, we're moving on. There's no unwinding it. It was awesome. It took forever. It took a long time to get them done.
I have a question.
But it was different.
So this gentleman in New Jersey, and
Yeah.
this is a little caveat that came to mind. Do you think that, not that you were naive, because you obviously were skilled at that point, do you think your naivety?
naive.
Okay,
I was
so I'll say that then. Do you think your naivety served you well? Because he was probably thinking, how did this kid, this young person, go out and get all these appointments, and now we're hitting some doubles and triples?
Yeah.
You know, because I believe that when you're young, your naivety is actually a pretty big strength,
Yeah.
because you don't know what you don't know. And so you're not scared of anything. You will get on the phone. You will call hundreds of banks that maybe you have no business calling. Or if you're older, you're going to be like, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have any success with it. Not that you're too good, but that you've seen how people don't have success with it. And so I'm just wondering what you're looking back. Do you think your naivety was actually a strength at that point?
100%. Yeah. I knew that I was out of my league when I end up in a meeting with the chief investment officer of Zions Bank. I mean, with literally very few clients, and I'm sitting in the meeting and he's firing questions at me. By the way, Zions Bank, they're some of the most brilliant financial minds on the planet here in Utah. Like, they know what they're doing. And so, yeah, I mean, I was naive. I had no idea. But here's the thing about that, you know, for young people who are like, oh, I need to build 10 years of expertise. I get that, right? When I look at my success formula, which I'm happy to share, expertise will take you out of the hemisphere. Like, it'll take you at a different place than hustle and charisma. Expertise will take you 100 times further. But when you're young, what you have is hunger, you know? And so these other partners that I had in that business, they weren't willing to do that.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, to be frank, they had millions and millions of dollars come in every month, right? They had passive income from years of doing this stuff.
Yeah, they're comfortable.
Yeah, right? And so what did they want? They want someone who was me. They wanted a hungry partner who was going to keep going. And I needed their expertise. So when I got them in the meeting, they knew what to say, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I literally was like, okay, he's going to talk now.
You were like the Jenga pieces fitting together. The old wise dogs.
Yeah, I was there to just drive and carry their bags, you know. But I brought something to the table, right? I was willing to do the gritty work and to get the appointment and to make it happen. And what ended up happening during that time frame is I got to sit at the feet of these brilliant minds, both on the client side of the table and those who were advising them. I mean, imagine just sitting for hours after hours, sitting in meetings, listening to guys solve huge financial problems for these institutions and watching boards of directors work. Today, I've sat in literally, I don't even know the number, 5,000 to 10,000 board meetings of some of the largest institutions in the U.S. in the financial and healthcare sectors. So when you sit in that many meetings, you can't not learn a ton, right? So what's up here now is just different, but it started with zero up here. I had nothing, you know? And so those years of working in those financial services were enormous, you know, with that firm in Princeton, New Jersey. And what ended up happening in 2007 was a massive meltdown in the economy, right? Community banks literally had droves of their banking customers come in and just turn in their keys to their house, to their car.
They were insolvent in a matter of 10 days.
Oh, it was unbelievable, right? And so during that time frame, you know, my partners had the capability of just weathering the storm. They had passive income, just going to keep their clients. Well, I couldn't do that. I was young, I was hungry, like I got to do something. So again, just dumb luck to a degree, but also sitting down intentionally and going, how do I pivot from here? What do I take in my knowledge now of what I've been doing and apply it in a different way? How can I get there? And it took a little bit of time, but what I ended up doing is starting another company called Telford Financial Executive Benefits, doing the same thing I was doing with banks, with credit unions. They're biggest competitors, right? And they don't really play well with each other. They're not friends in the sandbox, typically, you know? Credit unions don't pay tax. They're in business.
I was just going to say that.
Banks pay tax, have a lot of, you know, regulatory guidelines. Like it's an interesting environment. But I used all of that learning in the bank space, applied it to credit unions, brought on a couple good friends, really talented guys, and launched that firm in 2007. And a year later, merged it with our biggest competitor, who was out of Charlotte, North Carolina. So very quickly, it went from trying to just start, learn, figure it out, to merging with a competitor, and that firm became BFB, Burns Fozzie Brock and Associates. And we merged, and almost immediately we signed this partnership where one of the largest organizations of clients, just the sheer number of credit union clients, called Allied Solutions. Allied Solutions offers 100 different products and services to credit unions. They had a couple thousand sales reps around the country. They were brilliant relationship managers, and they had all of these credit union clients. And so almost overnight, by partnering with them, we went from having really 4 salespeople to having 2,000 reps out throughout the country saying to credit unions, you need to see BFB. You need to see BFB. So
it was like a plug and play marketing piece once you merged.
Timing. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, that year of starting the company, the things that we were doing that year of trying to get going and learning, and I laugh to this day. One of these just vivid memories of sitting in the back seat of one of the guys. We're going 100 miles an hour to St. George to a meeting. I'm putting together a proposal in the back seat. I'm like using, a stapler and all that. It was a mess, right? But that grit of putting in the time and the effort and just going for it paid off, because we merged that company together, and overnight, I'll just say this, we went on an 8-year treadmill run that was literally shooting fish in a barrel. That sounds horrible, right? Because they were amazing people, amazing organizations that became our clients. But it couldn't have lined up better in terms of economics, the people involved, how it worked. When we merged the company, we had 42 clients combined. When we sold it, there were almost 600 clients.
Wow.
In 8 years.
Wow.
So, yeah, 500, just under 600 institutional clients.
In 8 years.
Timing. Timing. Because you look at, it would have been easy to, at that point, and this is such a common theme with a lot of the people we talk to. Timing is just so important, and the opportunities that you say no to, the small jumps that you take, and then maybe a leap. Yeah. Would have been easy to take a W-2 salary job somewhere here local that was guaranteed, that was going to be a shoe-in, that would make you feel comfortable that night when you went to bed. 07, 08 were rough years, Tom. They were rough years. And I worked through that in the financial industry, and they were tough. To be born out of that era it took some cojones, right? And the timing of finding the right partner. Yeah, that's interesting.
It was tough, I mean, I could get super emotional about that phase. People tend to want to look at that and go, wow, the rise, the glory of all that. But in truth, it sucked.
Yeah.
I mean, my wife is an angel. When I knew that my partners could weather the storm on the bank side, and I knew that I wanted to go into the credit union side, we sold our house, took all of our nest egg, right? We moved to a duplex. The duplex has no dishwasher, right? When you turn on the AC, my son was like, is there a helicopter? He was young. That Christmas, I'll still, I get super emotional, but his Christmas list that year was a garage. Just like, can we be warm when we go out and get in the car? Why did we lose our house? What? So that was gritty. It was, it wasn't just like it worked out. People tend to want to think you just keep going and it works out that way. You have to put it in, you got to face the music. And during that same time frame, because of all the stress, because of the challenges of what was going on, my health was horrible. Couldn't figure it out, falling asleep all the time at my office. Well, end up getting diagnosed with chronic fatigue, Epstein-Barr virus, which if you do any research, it's It's having mono on steroids. You know, it's crazy. And so I want people to know the side of that. You know, that entrepreneurship, this rise, it isn't all glory. It's rough. You know, so to your point, like, it's really rough. But
You actually don't even marinate on it while you're in it. You're just grinding because you're the janitor, you're the payroll guy, you're everything until you can start to find some people to specialize. But I thank you for kind of being vulnerable with that, because myself, a lot of people that are going to hear this, they've got those times that they'll talk about in their professional life and in their career or their family life where they'll get emotional because it becomes really raw. From that time, there's lessons you learned, there's scars from that. How if you take maybe 18 months or 24 months during that time frame where decisions were like, I don't know, but we're just going to work and grind through it. How's that served you since then? Do you regret those happening, and are you a better person because of that? A better business owner because of those experiences?
Yeah. I mean, there's so much there to unpack, but think of where I'm at now. You know, I mean, fast forward, so go on this run, sell the company to Arthur J. Gallagher, which is a, you know, Fortune 500
2015
traded company in 2015. So have this recognition day, right, of like, this is really going to happen. And we can talk about that. But the day that I had my event, you know, when the dollars show up in the account, it changed everything for me. That day solidified what you just described. The scars, everything in that one moment that day changed everything for me in my life. It changed the trajectory. It changed a lot of things. But if you take what I learned in those years, the gritty years, the really struggling years, the years of tough health and having to sell a house, and, you know, what it's like to sit down, you know, with your kids and be like, yeah, we are moving to this place, and, you know, you can't have all of your same toys. There's not room, you know. So, but you take all of that and you put it together and think, what better people are there to start and run a mental health company today? You know, even though I'm on the investor side and I'm on the business side, I don't sit with people. But when I sit with our providers who sit with the people in pain, when I think about how to brand the business, when I think about how to appeal to, you know, our clients who come to see us, it's genuine because I've been there. I've been in the dirt. I know what it's like to feel depressed. I know what it's like to not have hope and to be like, hey, we're going to lose everything.
Those scars are still there from 15 years ago. And sorry to cut you off, but the hangover and the scars from those times in my life, they're so fresh. The wounds actually never heal. You know, they're there, and that's a great point. You know what that person or that individual is going through to some degree.
Yeah.
I never thought about that, but that's probably served you well.
Trevor Farnes, who we mentioned, who's a dear friend and from an amazing family. Trevor's story is so compelling to me because he just, when I visited with Trevor and when he kind of just, you know, told his story on a podcast I was involved in, Trevor said something that just blew my mind, and it just hit me like a ton of bricks, and that is, you know, you are most properly positioned to serve the person that you used to be. You know, the dude almost lost everything. They had no food. They literally were trying to figure out, you know, how to survive as a family. Well, now Trevor, you know, owns this company that is given away like 5 million meals or whatever the number is, right?
It's Mountain Ops, is that?
Yeah, Mountain Ops.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, all of that hard, heavy lifting that I did during those years positioned me to now be in the position of serving other people who may be struggling with their mental health, you know? And, you know, even today, you know, spending time, you know, with my business partners and owners on the phone, the tough challenges that are still in front of us, the headwinds that we're facing, I still go back and rely on those gritty moments of years ago. It still serves me today, you know?
Yeah.
So, I mean, the podcast that I own and that I'm involved with is called Brainstoke. And the mantra of Brainstoke is struggle and stoke. You can't be stoked. You cannot find stoke in life unless you go with struggle. And so the premise of that is to just embrace it, that it serves you well, that you can rely on the struggles that you faced in the past, one, to get through what you need in the future, but two, to help other people.
Yeah.
I've thought about that a lot recently, that, well, to your point, the stuff you had to go through to achieve the success you wanted to, first of all, most people see where you are, think they want to be there. I've told this to other guests too. But they wouldn't go through what you went through to get there. And the other side of that is I've been thinking a lot about how whatever success you want to achieve, whether it's financial, emotional, spiritual, whatever the plus side of that is, I've been thinking you almost, just in my short 24 years, you have to experience the exact opposite negative feeling of that or experience of that in order to get to that level of success. I don't know if that's true, but in my personal experience, it seems very true. And in hearing your story, it definitely came to mind that wherever you want to get to, you're going to have to experience something equally as bad, right? No pleasure without pain to get there. So what are you willing to go through? How much quote unquote shit are you willing to eat in order to get where you want to go? And I think it is really important to go deep with your own thoughts of how bad do I really want to get where I think I want to go? And am I willing to go through the pain to get there, right? I don't know. I've thought a lot about that. What would your advice be to someone young in those moments of, is this worth it? Do I really want to go through what I need to go through to get where I want to go to? What would your advice be to that person?
Yeah, this is good, to dive into this. So first of all, I have to say this. If you really want to be successful in life and you want to reach for that, then you should do it. But I also have to caution people who hear that so that you can understand that there is a toll you will pay. No one gets past the toll bridge of success. You have to pay the heavy toll. So it's possible that people inherit their wealth and they can double it or triple it and they can get there without paying the toll. But somewhere, some person paid the toll. Whether it was your grandpa or your dad or whoever, someone has to pay the toll. And the toll is heavy, by the way. Speak to any professional athlete and ask them, how is it? They likely will not tell you about the championships. They're going to want to talk about the toll, right? Because they know inside really what it takes to get there. The media wants to talk about just, the summit. But anybody who's climbed it will say, let me tell you what it was like when I almost died climbing to the summit. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And I say that so that people know, you have to pay the toll at some point. Having said that, if you're going to reach for the summit, whatever that is in your own life, you have to be very cautious of, is it worth it to you, your circumstance, and your mental health, your physical health, right? People destroy their lives trying to get to that success moment when in reality, they need to slow down a little bit, I literally wrote in a journal, I would show it to you, I would bring it, at 21, that I would retire at 42. I wrote it out, and then I wrote a very specific plan, and I worked the plan, and guess what? At 37, I sold that company. So was I ahead? Yep. Did it take its toll? 100%.
Yeah.
Right? I destroyed some of my physical health. I destroyed some of my mental health. So I say that just as a caution for people to know, if you're going to seek for success, you need to at least calibrate the time of that, what it takes, doing it where you can enjoy it, right? So many people achieve that ultimate success and they have no relationships after. Their marriage is done. Their physical health is destroyed. One of my good friends just told me about, she flew to Canada to sit with a multi-millionaire who is dying, who has no one around him. She flew there just to be with him while he died. He had no one. Think of that, right? So what do you want it for?
Right.
And just kind of calibrating, what that success looks like. But It absolutely can be done. You know, you can achieve it. You have to just understand your capacity to do it. Let me give you another example, okay? And if you didn't ask that question, I wouldn't have shared this, but I'm just going to share it. When I was in those early years of building the company, as far as I remember, I went about 8 to 9 months without a paycheck, right? And so it was living off that nest egg of like, it's dwindling, it's dwindling, it's dwindling. Like, can I buy diapers? Yeah, we're good. Do you know what I mean? Like needs, and it's dwindling, it's dwindling. When I was, building the businesses and working through that stuff, I remember thinking like, I will never go back to that place where it's just dwindling and dwindling and dwindling, right? Today, building this company, on July 1, it will have been exactly 2.5 years of building a company without pay, right?
Yeah.
So just like, right, what are you capable of doing? How committed are you to doing it? Are you committed to doing it how long without pay? Are you willing to not just go without pay? Are you willing to write 6-figure checks to put it in?
Right.
So that the business has the right people, so that they're getting paid and that they're being taken care of as they build it. So yeah, there are sacrifices. There's, your willingness, use the term, stand in the ship. I tend to just say, how long are you willing to stand in the fire? Yeah. How do you have that, have you exercised that muscle to sit in that, and is it okay with you? We talked about the bike earlier. It's amazing when you sit and talk to professional cyclists and you talk to them about the pain cave. It's remarkable how they talk about it. The other day we were on that ride with Kevin Day. Blair Perks was there. When I talk to Blair when we ride together, I will say something like, man, it's really hot. And Blair will say, man, isn't it so nice outside? Right? And what's interesting about that is he's kind of joking, and this is just another takeaway that I've learned. Positive self-talk is hokey for some. For others, it's literally brain science. Neuroplasticity is the brain's way of recruiting either good or negative things that are going to ultimately determine where you're going.
Big believer in that.
It's
I'm a
science,
big believer in
right?
that.
And people will hear that and like, whatever, like positive self-talk, like affirmation, that's hokey, that's lame, that's whatever. No, it literally is like Google neuroplasticity and understand how your brain works, and you'll start to recognize, how do successful people keep getting more and more and more? How does he keep doing 5th and 6th and 7th startup and getting better and better and better, right? They're literally recruiting cells in the brain that are success or failure. And that's just real, And so what I would tell people, if they really want to chase success, that they have to start at ground zero. How do you speak to yourself? What do you literally think about? What you tell yourself is ultimately going to determine where you go and your ability to get there. There's no way that you could look at my education and background and say that I should be where I am. And I'm not saying I've arrived. I'm just saying most people who start at Salt Lake Community College with a 17 on the ACT don't end up building companies, selling them, making 7 figures, and then reinvesting in other startups. That's typically not what you hear, right? And yet, how did it happen? Well, one, a lot of incredible mentors. And so I have to give credit to, I've been mentored and coached up by some amazing people. But a couple things I did get right is learning how to positive self-talk. When I'm on the bike with my son and we're suffering and he's like, this sucks. And I'm like, how do you turn that? Like, what would you say in a positive way versus this sucks? And he's like, I'm 14 and I'm climbing one of the highest peaks in Utah. Yeah. How many 14-year-olds knows that rides their bike to the top of Francis Peak? Not many.
Yeah.
I don't know, right? Immediately his body language shifted. He rose in the saddle and all of a sudden he's like, instead of 4 miles an hour, he's 6. right? And so those are just those things of like in those early years, you may not have money, you may not even have a great education, but you sure can talk positively to yourself. That's huge.
A great example of that is when you are in an event and you know when the finish line is. I've had this happen. This is why I bring it up. You know where to gauge and you know where to sit yourself. Of course, you've always, whether you're running or cycling, you've got that sprint before the end. But if the finish line all of a sudden changed, or the lap count all of a sudden changed, and you were out there for another 5 miles or another 3 laps, it would be devastating because you've patterned yourself to know that, okay, I'm prepared for this, and then more gets thrown on you. And I wouldn't say you can't recover from it, but it's very difficult. In life, with business, with a family, with spirituality, with friendships, you don't know where the finish line is, you know? And I know we're talking a lot about money, but money as a metric of success. But I know some very successful people that don't have a lot of money. They've put their emphasis on free time and family. Of course, everyone has to pay their bills, but it's an interesting thing to talk about when you look at mental fortitude, when you talk about self-talk. I'm a huge, huge believer in it. In life, though, you just never know when the finish line is. And when you start to, and I want to transition into some of the mental health stuff that I think you can give some really good insight on. But when you don't know when the finish line is and you encounter depression, anxiety, several bad days strung together or weeks strung together, it's really hard to get back on the bike and ride those 3 more laps because you don't know when it's going to happen.
Yeah.
You don't know when that strategic partner is going to come in and open up 2,000 new reps that are going to allow you to expand your business. Fortitude and that self-talk is the only way to get through that, or one of the ways. I think there's some other ways from third-party people, such as therapists, that can help you develop those skills. But everyone has the ability to develop those skills. They just haven't been taught.
Yeah.
They haven't learned it. It's a learned skill. Everyone can learn that. I think that as we transition into talking a little bit about mental health, what's your assessment? And sorry to just kind of move right into this, but what is your assessment with what you've seen the past several years with business owners, people with families, just average dudes? How is their mental well-being in America?
I think that people in general are struggling with the sheer speed at the way society lives now. I think that people are as educated as they've ever been. They're as capable as they've ever been. And I think that people want more out of life. And I think that their aspirations and what their goals are, in a lot of cases, are high. And I think that people are trying to achieve them, even at the extent of their mental health, you know? And so I think that is part of it, you know, that people are trying to achieve, and they're, for whatever reason, for good things to provide for their family, or it may be very vain things. You know, I mean, that is one of the downsides of social media today and so much media, is that people see lifestyle more than they ever have been. You know, a younger generation growing up now sees, you know, 12 to 14 hours a day maybe of media. You know, even in school, they're watching media. That's part of the education. You know, they'll see YouTube news, or they'll, you know, watch the news in school and they'll learn from it. Not a bad thing, but they're seeing a lot of media. So when I was a kid, you know, if you watched Dukes of Hazzard on a Saturday night, and maybe went to a movie, you know, maybe a game, collectively your week may be full of maybe 4 to 5 hours of media, you know, and maybe if you could sneak in some Saturday morning cartoons, right? But if you combine that all, that's maybe like 6 hours a week. Most kids, I mean, I literally heard this the other day, an argument between parents, and the kid was like, I want my media time per day to be 6 hours. You know, when you combine like on your phone, when you combine how much TV, when you combine how much time on your, you know, whatever, your VR, right? 6 hours a day, you know, and these are parents who are involved. This is not like
Good parents.
yeah, great people, you know, but just the expectation of consumption of what do I spend my time on? My homework's done. I want a VR for 4 hours, you know. My friends are all online type thing. So that sounds absurd, but if you think that through now, you just have an entirely different environment. And you tend to want to say, well, that's kids, you know, they want to spend 6 hours a day. But if you guys have ever worked in a professional office, people are working, but they're also mediating all at the same time, right? They've got YouTube up, they're watching whatever, they've got their phone over here, they've got the tour going, which starts soon, which I'll be 3 weeks watching tour, right?
Guilty as
And then
charged.
I'll watch We Do podcast, talk
Sure.
about the tour, right? And so to pin it on kids and say that it's a kid's problem is not the problem. It's modeled, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we know that parents are sitting watching their phones around the clock too. So what does that all mean? It means that you have people have big aspirations for life and goals. They're educated. They have a high expectation of their own lives. But then you have this other thing, which is feeding FOMO, right? Media's constant reassurance of, well, someone's getting that or has that or looks good or looks this way. And the combination of those two things, I think, is overwhelming to the mind. My wife would say, as a therapist, most people have way too many apps open and the brain does not know what to do with it. So what do they need to do? They need to start swiping up, like close some apps down. Like
Yeah.
literally give your brain a chance, you know? So when we thought about Levo and really what we want Levo to be, in my mind, I want people to remind, right? There was a time when we used to say, right, VHS, how are you gonna rewind that VHS,
Yeah.
right? Like rewind doesn't even...
You
that's-
get fined if you returned it and it wasn't
yeah,
rewound.
it has to be rewound, right? And so, I mean, this generation's like, you don't rewind anything. Like,
Yeah.
you just skip to the next song, right? I mean, you just pull up the next song. But I want people to stop and remind. Remind yourself of like, do you remember a time when it was like quiet, where you didn't sit on the back porch with your phone and like look at LinkedIn and all your social media and get caught up? Like you literally just sat there with your mind, you know? I love being on the bike for that reason. Even if I have music on, it's not music and watching something, it's just letting my mind wander. People ask me all the time, like, how do you think about business strategy, or how do you think about your next investment? My go-to is on the bike, listening to music. I mean, it's how my mind works on problems and solves things. And I think that's very challenging for most humans' minds. They have too many apps open, and I think the mind is literally just like for
Overstimulated,
lack of a better
confused.
term, I mean, and anxiety is used in so many different contexts, but the mind is anxious. I mean, it literally is too much going. Its operating system
Way too much
is just
input.
like, what the, come on, man. Like, and when you really start to study the brain and the mind and what's going on there, the brain needs a break.
Mm-hmm.
You know? I mean, I don't know how often you guys are cycling or riding. I try to ride anywhere from 8 to 14 hours a week, right? If I get close to 14, I know the following week I got to recover, right? And so I'm taking very intentional sleep. I'm focusing on certain things. I'm using my Whoop and looking at how much recovery do I need. Most people never give the mind time to recover. They're just totally zapped. And you can see it, by the way. I don't see it as much in my world now, but when I was traveling 110, 115 business nights a year for about 8 years when we were building that company, go to the airport, sit down, and just look, we just watch people. It's zombie land,
Yeah.
right? Literally. I mean, you're just like, see if you can find one person smiling.
Yeah.
It's almost sad, right? But that is the implications of society has way too many apps open. And it's in everything. You can open them in your car, you can open on your phone, just all around us. And so, yeah, I mean, it's hard to put your finger on any one thing, but generally speaking, I don't think that people are taking time to just decompress.
And just be.
Just be.
It's
It's uncomfortable for a lot of people, right? The habits have already been formed.
yeah. We had a gal on, Tana Fox, a couple of episodes ago, who's a brilliant mind about nutrition. And she's big on gut health, but one of the things that she talked about was if you can, eat right, get your gut healthy, and really change your lifestyle and get into good eating habits, it's okay to have a weekend where you fall off the wagon. Go to Hawaii and not eat great for a week because your body's built up, you have a long track record of eating well, so you'll bounce back quickly.
Yeah.
But it takes time to develop that track record and get your body to ground zero. And as I'm thinking about the brain, you have to be, just from what you just described, you have to be intentional, I think. And I'm not an example of this. I'm not great at this because there's so many distractions that are intriguing that pop up on your phone, on TV. Like you said, I'll have the tour going. I'm also sending emails and juggling phone calls. You know what I mean? There's just a lot going on. I think that you have to be intentional about the things that you remove from your life.
Yeah.
In order to get your brain to that ground zero.
Yeah.
And allow yourself to kind of calibrate and find out, do I actually have some anxiety, or is all this causing anxiety? And if I just eliminate it, some of that'll go away. I'll sleep better. I won't be worried. I won't have that FOMO of missing out. And I would include adults are in this as well. You're sitting there talking about kids, and I'm like, Tom, that's me. That's me.
It is adults.
And nobody's parenting me right now. I'm parenting myself. I think it's everybody, and you say FOMO, but it's you see so much of what's out there, which is great. You get to see all the culture of the world, but only the sexy stuff goes on social media and on TV. Joe Atkins said, "I'm not putting my failures on LinkedIn." And nobody's bragging about their failures. Nobody's throwing their vulnerabilities out there. And so I think if you don't understand that, you don't have a knowledge of that, you just think you're in a terrible place. And so you start grasping at things that look like they're going to make you happy. And when you achieve what you thought was going to make you happy, most of the time it doesn't. It's the journey getting there and what you gain from that journey that goes into your character.
Yep.
Do you know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah, you're spot on. But I think you're saying some things that I hope listeners, your audience who's listening to this, that they cue in on. If you're following people on social media and it's all sexy, if it's all perfect, I'm just telling you right now, you're following the wrong people. Whether you get rid of them on Instagram is up to you. But if you're basing your journey, where you're going, your life, what you want out of life, based on somebody else who's only putting that out there, just know that you'll never connect that dot. You will never be that person, right? If you sit with a social media influencer, right? And my wife's, one of her best friends is a big one, right? If I told her, you'd know her, right? She has millions on Instagram. When you sit and talk to her about her real life, the behavior, the habits that it takes, what she does to put into the business that has gained the millions, no kid would ever do what she does.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable work. I mean, I think I work. She's at another level, right? So if you think that you can get a couple million followers, even those who are jokesters, those guys are doing it 20 hours a day to get those 2 cuts, right? At least be real. So again, this is the Liza-ism from my wife, so wise. If you're going to compare your life, at least compare fairly, right? Your 3 cuts that you took over 2 minutes to put your video online, right, that only got 7 likes, right? This is an entirely different facade that's going on out there. And so you just have to at least be comparing real, with what's going on. But, when you circle back to your point about that's my life or that's what I'm doing, I think that adults have to be, for a lack of a better term, they have to be sold on why turning it off and flipping the apps closed is helpful to them, it's beneficial to them. And the answer is that there's substance and there's progression in letting your mind do what it's capable of doing. So let me give you another example. So I've been looking at a company for a while to invest in. They're publicly traded, and I've really wanted to make an investment. And I don't just read about them online. In fact, I could care less. I could go on here and read about this company all day long, and I'm going to get the media's version of why I should invest in the company, right? If it's in the news, it's too late to invest, right? That's just a rule of thumb. Like, if the media caught on, it's too late, right? The ship has sailed. Not always, but that's how I approach investing. Well, I do a little bit of research online, then I want the reports. I want to sit in quiet and read. What's going on? What's their philosophy? I want to know the people behind the company. How do I find them out? What are their habits and behaviors like? What are they thinking about? All of that stuff, right? So I do the research and I let my mind just chew on it, right? So I do all the research, I sit on it. This is the real story. This happened to me like a month ago. So I put it away, right? I do all the research, I put it away, I just let it permeate in my mind. One day I go to a lunch meeting. I had forgotten, it wasn't even on my radar screen. Go to the lunch meeting, I sit down with this guy. We start talking and I'm getting to know him. It's a first time lunch meeting, right? A business date. We're getting to know each other a little bit. And right during the middle of him and I getting to know each other, my mind says, go invest in that company right now. I'm like, what the? Go invest in that company right now. Literally having this inner dialogue. I'm trying to be present and listen to him, but my mind is saying, go invest in this company right now. And it was just this awkward moment of like, what? Like, this doesn't happen very often, to me. Right. But the waiter comes over and he's like, hey, I gotta take your order. And I say to this gentleman, great guy, hey, I'm gonna run to the restroom real quick. I went in the restroom and I bought 10,000 shares of the company. And it was the most bizarre thing, that I had experienced that way as an investor. Go back, sit down, carry on the lunch, totally forget about it, right? Later that day, I'm sitting there and I'm like, wait, I invested in it, Go back, open up my account, my trading account, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, yeah, it actually went through. They filled all the orders, it took 3 or 4 different orders to get it. Well, I'm like, okay, so I'm in. What a weird feeling, right? Well, 10 business days later, they're up 30%, and I just think through those moments of, am I present in my own life, right? Even with this guy, like, even though I was at a meeting, I think that there are lots of moments where we want things to occur in our life, but we have too many we're so distracted, right? I mean, I sit with guys all the time who are like, yeah, I'm looking at my stocks, and they're flipping through all this stuff, and they think that somehow that looking at media is going to teach them how to invest money, or that they're going to catch on to the thing. When in reality, if you sat, I'm sure, with Warren Buffett and said, tell me how you invest. Does he even have a phone? I don't know. But the guy's learning.
A rotary phone.
Yeah, his, Warren Buffett's mind is engaged on the narrow, which allows him to do this, right? And I think that there's so many lessons with brilliant minds that they take time to sit and think and ponder and read. They are the old school minds, right? When you and I grew up, how many people did you just see sitting on their front porch? Just like...
They might have a paper, but that's about it.
Yeah, and I think that they were, whether it was a relationship and having a conversation, we're talking about investing in those things, but that's also the case in relationships. You know, there's going to be a whole generation of kids right now who grow into be adults, and they're going to go sit with their therapist and just be like, yeah, so this is my childhood watching my dad. Like, his face illuminated while I stared at my tablet and my dad. Do you know what I mean? Like, these are, so we're talking about the money implications of it, but it's also just the relationship implications.
Yeah.
You know, of connecting with people. Two things to just throw out to you just as thoughts. One, the opposite of addiction is connection. Right? I heard someone say this to me recently, a brilliant guy, Curtis Morley. He's an author, great guy. And he talked about this fact of the opposite of addiction is connection. Do you have real connections with other people? That blew me away just to think through that. I have addiction in my own family, you know, alcoholics, drug addictions. And when you think that through, the opposite of addiction is having true connections with other people. I think that that's amazing to just think that through. And what is technology doing? It's standing in the way of a lot of connection. We think that it's real. TikTok, Snapchat, all those things, but it's not real eyeball to eyeball connecting. The other thing you asked about, just mental health, that I think is a fascinating stat. Harvard did a review years ago. It comes out every year. You hear more and more of it. 90 to 95% of all sickness is correlated to stress. And you just think that through for a second, you know, like, wait, all? You know, 90 to 95% of all sickness, you know, is due to some stressor. And so, you know, when you talk about mental health and what I'm seeing, when I go back to those early years in my 20s and 30s of building companies, I was horrible at stress management. I was so poor at that. How to deal with it the right way, how to cope with stress the right way. I love to eat. I'm an eater. You know, my preferred coping mechanism would be eating. In those years, though, as time went on, what I started to recognize was that in order to perform at a high level, in order to keep my mind where it needed to be, I needed to learn better positive coping. And that's when I really dove into cycling. You know, I was doing triathlon. As time went on, I couldn't run the same way because of some ski racing injuries from being younger. But that's when I really started to cue into positive coping and how valuable it is to consistently be outside in the sun, sweating, and doing something that I'm stoked about, you know, which is part of the 5 S's.
I was
of
going to
brain
ask,
stuff.
can we talk about the 5 S's?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. But, you know, the 5 S's really are a way to remind people to get serotonin in your life consistently. And if you really study the brain and you kind of dive into, you know, what serotonin is and does, it's one of the 4 happy chemicals. D.O.S E, we talk about it on Brainstoke, get your daily dose. D.O.S E stands for, you know, the 4 different happy chemicals: dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. And if you look at the, you know, the research on it, yes, they make you feel happy. They feel, you know, make you feel the runner's high or all of these things. But when I started to cue into being on the bike, and I was doing it because I enjoyed biking and it helped me cope with stress, I did not understand in those early years that it would become my greatest source of inspiration in business, entrepreneurship, in problem solving. It was bizarre that I could be out on the bike listening to Tom Petty, and all of a sudden problems that I was having in a business or investment or things that I was doing, all of a sudden the light bulb would just go on, and I was like, that's how I need to solve it. Serotonin became this like magic elixir of problem solving for me. And so you know, now, before I was like, oh, do I have time to get on the, I shouldn't get on the bike, like I need to do this and this, and it's like, I make time now. I actually block it in my schedule because I know that the investment in that is better for my mind. It's better for, you know, my problem solving in the business. It's better for problem solving in relationships. Clarity comes from allowing the mind to just experience those feelings, that serotonin, that oxytocin, those things. So when you start seeing that and doing that, and then you start having great outcomes, getting stronger on the bike, your watts go up, the ability to ride to a mountain, not one time, maybe the top 2 times, and so the results reinforce doing it again and again. You lose your belly, all of a sudden you're like, man, I look good.
Self-esteem goes up.
Everything
confidence goes up.
Totally. It sucks to start from ground zero.
Yeah.
Right? Doesn't it? Just when you're not eating good, you don't feel great, you're out of shape. But I'm telling you that if men and women, adults, would put movement into their lives, it's a game changer.
Consistently over.
And people say this all the time, like, well, I'm not athletic, or I don't do it. Stop thinking about being athletic. Stop thinking about like 6-pack abs and do I want to be hot? Like, don't think about the vanity side. Think about just your brain health.
Yeah.
Your ability to problem solve in businesses and in parenting and doing these things. The mind hungers for those happy chemicals. So
with Brainstoke, I want to give that a plug because Brainstoke is your podcast that's been going for a year and a half. Yeah. That's on Apple, Spotify, anywhere they can get their podcasts. But that's kind of your mantra, is the daily dose with Brainstoke, correct? Yeah. Say that one more time. The DOSE stands for? Yeah, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. Which is exactly what you just explained. Get that daily dose. Yep. That's beautiful. Yeah, getting that into your life. And it doesn't have to be through exercise only. People may feel, those chemicals when they sit and read a book. When they're doing something that they are stoked about, find a passion. If it's playing chess, if it's, whatever. The brain releases and can experience those chemicals in lots of different ways. The things that kill it, being sedentary, not moving, eating crappy food, that kills it, right? And so there are a number of things. When you look at the don't list, society's full of that stuff. It's easy to access it, right? The other things that, we actually need to put into our life, not all of them are hard to experience and to do, but you have to do them. Intentional. You have to be intentional about it. Yeah. Yeah. Tom, where else? We've got Brainstoke. Levo. How do people get in touch with Levo? Yeah, levomind.com is, the website. And obviously all social media channels, they can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and those things. Even saying that, I just have to say this to an audience, being in the mental health space, we utilize social media because it's a way to get in touch with people. We know that people are on those channels. Do we love social media from a mental health perspective? We do not. We're not anti, but
it's a powerful tool if it's used right.
It's exactly right. I love hearing people who will reach out to us and say, we read your post on, being more self-compassionate. When I wake up in the morning and I see myself in the mirror, I don't see anything positive. I'm like, oh, you look old, or you look fat, or, we would never say things to other people what we say to ourselves. And so things like that we put on social media, just reminders, of good, positive, habits, for people to think about. But with social, this is one little plug. I went through about 90 days ago, and I changed up all the people I was following, which then in turn changed a lot of my algorithm as to what I was getting fed and what changed. And I'm telling you, it made a massive difference. I was just talking to my wife about this. When you clean it up and you start to follow things that are more appealing to where you want to go, it actually can be a good tool. They find things like Brainstoke where you have these 60, 90-second clips with great advice. Yeah. And so it's when you go down the rabbit hole of the Gucci bags and the Ferraris and
the pictures on green screens in France, and you feel like your brain doesn't know. It feels like it's missing out on all this great stuff. And meanwhile, you're living in Draper and have to go to work every day, And so it can be a good tool. One thing that I've taken from chatting with you, for me personally, this has been great, is I have to be more intentional with how I use my time and how I interact with social media in general.
I think that I appreciate that, by the way. That's kind of you to say that. That's taken practice, for me. And what I've recognized is that, we didn't dive into this necessarily in my childhood, but I was the slow kid in school. Today, for sure, if I was in elementary school, I would have had a first grade or a second grade teacher say, hey, at parent-teacher conference, I'd love to talk to your parents. And then my parents would sit down with them. And teachers, by the way, can't say it, right? They cannot tell parents, I think your child has a problem. There's actually rules against doing that. But a good teacher may say something like, hey, Tom's falling behind. And today, if I were in school, for sure I would have an ADHD diagnosis. 100% chance. I know it. In fact, I've been diagnosed as an adult because Levo offers ADHD testing. And so I went through all of it before we invested in it. And what I've uncovered is that if I were to go back and start over again, I wish someone would have taught me what you described. Tom, you're going to be fine, but you have to be intentional. If you just let your brain do what it wants to do, right, you'll never get anything done. You'll be late to everything. You'll look like a mess all the time, And so part of what happened at 21 years old is that I started to realize is that I don't have to be the slow kid anymore, but I have to be damn good at being intentional.
Yeah.
So, if people were to follow me in my life, they would think I'm pretty anal in a lot of ways. I have a kind of a chill persona, Tom Petty. Let's hit the road and go to Moab. But when I'm on, I'm on. If you open my planner right now, every Sunday night I plan for 30 minutes. I know when I'm working out. I know the meetings that I need to be at. I know exactly, the time I'm going to spend with family. I'm a planner for sure. Not because I'm that guy who's really anal that way, but because that's what I have to do for my mind.
It's what works for you.
It's what works for me. Right?
Yeah.
It's what I've had to adopt with the set of tools that I've been given. I have to do certain things for me, to stay on top of my own mind, my own brain, and my own habits. So, yeah, intentional is big, and the cool thing about being intentional is it doesn't take very long before you start stacking up lots of wins, not just business wins. Those are rare. But, if you have 2 or 3 weeks of just staying on top of what's important to you, really quickly you see results, right?
It starts to compound too, and then it becomes habit, second nature, and life changes.
Momentum is freakishly powerful in this life. You get going and you build that momentum, and all of a sudden it's like, wow, what you can do and achieve is remarkable.
The other thing that I would leave our listeners with that you touched on and reminded me of is whether you're spiritual or not is not the point. Allowing your intuition, conscience, the universe, the spirit, whatever you want to call it, to speak to you takes some clarity. And the only way to have that clarity is, like we said, to be intentional and kind of get down to ground zero and clear out all the cobwebs and all the noise, and you'll make better, clearer decisions. And I think that's where you'll find some self-awareness and that self-esteem too, instead of trying to get it. Because I believe that people go to the social media, and I know we're talking a lot about social media, and I hate to do that, but it's such an easy crux to go after. It's an easy victim, right? But they're always trying to validate or get these little hits of dopamine, and so they're constantly reaching out to different media outlets. And if you just kind of, I speak from experience. We had a cabin up in Heber City, and I would go up there by myself a lot of nights because we had a lot of work to do on this project. And I would work outside. Well, there's no Wi-Fi outside. And so I'd be out there working sometimes for hours on end. And I started to really enjoy it. It was a weird kind of thing. And I think it's because I was just in my own thoughts in nature I like to work. And it was kind of a beautiful time. When I'm at home, I've usually got music going, even if I'm in the yard or in the garage. But I was just out there grinding away, getting bit by mosquitoes. And it was kind of a beautiful time for several months, just doing these little projects in my own thoughts. And just as you were talking, that crossed through my head, because I don't get that. Like, I have to be intentional to find those things. I had this little world up there working on the cabin, but it was kind of a cool time where I got to think about a lot of things.
Yeah.
And
I love that.
Yeah.
I think that, so plan it, right?
Yeah, plan it.
What's interesting you say about that is, so years ago, my wife said, for your birthday, what do you want this year? And I said, how about a couple days on my bike in southern Utah? She's like, cool, go for it. So I went down a couple days, invited a couple buddies of mine, but typically, they can come or not come. They're busy, So the next year it grew to 3 days, and then the next year 4 days, 5 days, So if people were to ask me, like, what was the secret to the year? What was your secret to this year? What I get done in thinking on, I call it Tom Week. We joke. All my buddies now give me grief. They're like, oh yeah, when's Tom Week? Where are you going? But it's either Moab or St. George, and I spend a ton of time on my bike. And what I work through in my own mind, I feel like I cover a journey from Earth to the moon. And I just work through so many things. And I know people hear this, and I know they're like, this is crazy. Is this guy like smoking weed at night? Like, who is this guy talking about? But the mind is crazy.
It is.
It has so much capacity, right? I mean, it's unbelievable what is there. And we know, it's scientifically proven that we use so very little of the capacity that we have. And this is going to sound strange, but I just have to say, again, I mentioned right at the beginning, I'm so independent. I get so, I'm going to say ticked off. I get so ticked off that someone would take my brain space and not give me a return on that.
That's funny.
I'm so, think of that. How crazy is this guy?
It's a good way of putting it, though.
The thought of someone stealing my mind space and not giving me an ROI drives me nuts.
Yeah.
Right? Even to come here with you guys, time is worth so much. If it wasn't talking about this stuff that I felt like helps my mind be positive and hopefully helps somebody else, I wouldn't do it. I say no to 95% of things that come to me because I don't think they're worth an ROI on my mind.
That's a good thing we had K-Day to interject. Shout out to K-Day.
I mean, that sounds so my time's worth so much. No, it's just because if you've ever been the slow kid, right, and what you need to just survive in a life where you're already behind, then you start protecting your mind with everything. You only put in it what is going to allow you to climb the mountains, go to the moon, right? And so if you really start thinking about that, if you really were going to say, okay, my mind is my greatest asset that I have, how do I protect it the most, right? I mean, you'd never not wear a helmet on a bike now, right? Well, what's the version of going out and riding down Parleys going 50 without a helmet on, right? Any media that's negative. Why? Just shut it off. Get rid of it. Social media that's not going to help you learn something positive or serve relationships or serve you in a positive way, just turn it off, right? Politics, I mean, I can't even go there.
Right.
I can't even, to me, and I know, that's irresponsible. You're a voter. I'll vote. But to give any sort of time to rhetoric that is just garbage,
pointless,
I can't do it, And so, I don't know. That sounds crazy and extreme, but I value life and I value my time, and the best way that I can spend that life and time is doing it in the best ways where, you know, my mind can flourish and do well and to be happy and successful, and the rest of the stuff I just want to minimize.
Yeah.
Tom, you've given us a lot of great info. I thank you so much for your time. Brainstoke podcast, check it out on social as well, but be cognizant when you're on social. And you're on LinkedIn as well.
Yep.
You can look Tom up on LinkedIn, but thank you for your time. We really, really appreciate it. Listeners, please subscribe and follow us and share this with others if you found it interesting.
It's awesome. You guys are doing great things and positive, and I'll follow.
Awesome.
I'm now a follower. I'll
Appreciate
be listening
it.
to every episode.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you
Thanks,
for
Tom.
having me.
Appreciate you, my friend.